Welcome to another recycled review where I'm going to go through 15 bottles, but before I throw them away in the recycling here, I'm going to give you a bit of a summary of what I thought about them from the start to finish to the bottom of the bottle and give them a wee bit of a score. We've had a nice wee fall of snow overnight, but it's not actually snowing now. These are fake snowflakes in case you haven't spotted that already. Remember, just like previous reviews, you don't have to take just my opinion. In the description box below, you're going to find links to lots of reviews out there on YouTube and beyond in order for you to get a bit more intelligence before you go and spend your hard-earned cash. Also, in that description box below, you're going to find a link to a spreadsheet that's going to list all the scores for all the previous recycled reviews and these 15 or so bottles that we have here. What you're also going to find is a little column that says "Changed My Mind." And anybody that knows whisky is going to understand what that column's about. That's when you've kind of gotten to know a whisky, you've decided that you're going to give it a score, but over time either the whisky or perhaps you have changed a wee bit. And that means that you're not quite as confident in your original score and you want to modify it by a point or so. That's what that column's about. I'll update it from time to time, but generally it's always just there as a guide. Okay. Let's get started. Interesting one to start with. Here we've got an English whisky. This is Bimber. This is their Ex-Bourbon oak casks. I think in the last recycled review I talked about the Re-Charred release. This is one of their kind of core regular expressions now, the Ex-Bourbon cask. And this one is batch number 1 from 2020, one of 1948 bottles. So we have to remember this was bottled in May 2020 and it's quite small batch release, less than 2,000. There's not many of these going around, which makes it difficult for a lot of people to get a hold of it, and it also means that the prices kind of stay artificially high because this is 3-year-old whisky and it starts at £65 for you to buy this. However, it is very good whisky and people rave about this, and it is with merit. It is very decent. I would prefer that, yes, they're probably doing things a bit differently there. Yes, they're using good casks, but the prices remain a bit expensive. But it's a moot point. For most of us, we're not going to be able to get a hold of this anyway. It's snapped up really quite quickly, and it means that the secondary market prices are even higher again. So Bimber should be applauded for keeping their prices stable, I guess, and not following that secondary market trend. They're a producer and they need to sell whisky at the right price, the best whisky that they can make, and ignore what's happening on the secondary market. It's not always going to be there. I would say that this was another excellent expression. I prefer the Re-Charred cask, honestly. Most people tend to, I find, enjoy this Ex-Bourbon cask a bit better, but the Re-Charred cask had a wee bit more interest for me. I would say that if you can get your hands on a Bimber, the chances of you picking up a bad one are really slim. I've yet to taste one that isn't interesting or very good. I would say that I would score this one an 8 out of 10. I'd like to see more from Bimber in the past. I hope they're going to be able to release more so that more of us can get our hands on it and keep the prices steady and keep it a drinker's whisky rather than a collector's whisky. Still, 8 out of 10 and pretty good stuff. This isn't a bad whisky, but it's not good either. This is Laphroaig's standard, worldwide available core 10-year-old. Now in the UK, the problem with this is that it's presented at 40%. Some of you, depending on where you are, will get this at 43%, and good for you, that's going to make this a wee bit better. But the problem with this, unless it's the only whisky you're going to drink of an evening, sipping it alongside anything else makes it taste really quite watered down. It's really like somebody's added water already. Now I'm speaking, of course, from the position of an enthusiast. Not everybody's going to be happy at 40% ABV. They're going to want to add water, especially if they're just beginning to enjoy high strength spirits. However, For anybody that's interested in whisky longer term, Laphroaig 10-year-old at 40% is just not going to hold their interest. This has been chill filtered, it's had colour added, it's at 40% ABV. The only thing it has going for it is that decent, honestly, 10-year-old age statement. Like I say, it's not bad whisky, it is enjoyable, it's still good, there's still lots of flavours in there, there's still even Laphroaig character in there, that lovely iodine and powerful peat smoke thing. It's one of the strongest, most flavoursome Islay whiskies still. But if you really want to taste Laphroaig, try and get your hands on a cask strength version instead, or a higher ABV release. Maybe one of their non-age statement ones, maybe something from an independent bottler, or maybe their own 10-year-old cask strength release, which is infinitely better than this one. And even if you've got a bottle of this still there on the shelf, take a little bit of the higher strength stuff and mix it in with this, and it just brings the glass alive again. Still, you can't knock Laphroaig 10. It's been doing amazing stuff for years and years, and it continues to bring a lot of people into the category. I would score this Laphroaig 10 at 6.5 out of 10. I'd be still happy to replace it, honestly, and have it in the cabinet. It's nice to have something a bit softer ABV wise to give to somebody that's still coming in, but I tend not to reach for it very often. That's more about where I am in my journey and less judgment on where other people are in theirs. 6.5 out of 10. There are other good Laphroaigs out there. Oh. Broken cork. It's another Islay whisky we have here, however, something completely different. This is cask strength. It doesn't have an age statement on it, but it does have a distillation, a bottling date to tell us exactly what the age is, and we can see here that this is more or less, looks like a 15-year-old release. This is Bunnahabhain's Amontillado finish. This is unpeated. It's a fantastic presentation, 57.4% ABV cask strength, says on the bottle non-chill filtered, and it also says natural colour as well. The problem with these releases from Distell, whether it's Deanston, whether it's Tobermory, whether it's Bunnahabhain or Laphroaig, is the price. They've got some really good value whiskies out there, quite inexpensive releases, and then they're smaller releases, their smaller batch strength releases has just been creeping up and up and up, where we used to be able to pick these up for 75 and 80 pounds. Most of them are over 100 pounds now, almost regardless of the age. It's much more about the cask and perhaps the perceived demand for the release. I'm going to back off a wee bit until the prices become a bit more accessible. I have to watch what I'm spending on whisky now, and I have to be buying whisky that I can share with people and not have to push people towards paying £140 for a special release. Honestly, this was excellent whisky. So good that when you were in the mood for something rich and sweet, there was very little in the cabinet that would beat this. You could even pour this, honestly speaking, over ice cream, and it was amazing. This Amontillado finish was a really, really good whisky, but I wouldn't run out and replace it again. There's plenty other interesting whiskies and good whiskies for that price and much cheaper that would mean that I'm going to switch it up a wee bit. And it meant that this whisky ended up being just a wee bit too precious for me. Excellent stuff, 8.5 out of 10, but just a bit too pricey. Well, we're on the subject of price. Glengoyne Teapot Dram. Recently in a recycled review, I threw away batch 6. This is batch 7. For anybody that's interested in how this would stack up against its peers, all you have to do is look at the VPub, the live stream that was on recently, where we looked at Christmas drams. This was one of the whiskies in the mix without spoiling too much, and it might be interesting to you to see just how well it did against old and new Aberlours, against other sherry cask expressions, and against Glenfarclas 105. This was always a whisky that was dear to me. I found it fantastic. And at £90 it was one of the most expensive whiskies I was buying regularly and putting in the cabinet. But I enjoyed it, and I drank it quickly, and I replaced it again. When it jumped up to £120 I stopped doing that. This is the only bottle of the batch 7 I bought. Will I replace it again? I'm not going to say no. Perhaps I might. But it's something I'm going to have to think about, because it's a much longer consideration at £120 than it was at £90. Still, there's no doubt that this is excellent, bold, powerful, first fill Oloroso sherry cask whisky. Just almost unique, honestly speaking. Some American oak, some European oak in there. This batch 7 had some older stock in there as well, 14 years old. So we believe the range to be from about 8 to 14 years in this. It was really, really excellent whisky. Better than 6, back up again, matching number 5 for me. That was 2 of my favourite ones. 6 was a wee bit hot. I'd say that if this is the style of whisky that I'm looking to replace, to fill that gap in the cabinet, then maybe I would consider it. There's no questioning the quality, just questioning the price a wee bit. We have to remember that while this is special, only 3,000 or so bottles released, £120 is a lot of money for 8 to 14 year old whisky. And yet it keeps justifying itself. Excellent stuff. Glengoyne Teapot Dram Batch 7, 9 out of 10. I'm going to miss that one as well. This came out recently in a hero whisky video from me. This is Glencadam's 10-year-old Highland. Unchill filtered, no added colouring, right on the label. Age statement, right on the label. 46% ABV as well. All 4 check boxes ticked. Brilliant stuff, brilliant presentation, but the most amazing thing for me on this was it's wonderful whisky to just enjoy, to sip. Quiet and subtle and yet complex and gently spiced. It's a fantastic whisky. If you haven't picked up or engaged with Glencadam 10, at the price I paid for this especially, it was £30 or less. There's nothing to argue about. It's just wonderful, wonderful stuff. You might have to pay £35 or a wee bit more depending on where you are, but I would have to say that at this presentation and this quality, it's worth it. And this is the type of presentation and this is the type of whisky that everybody should be applauding, because we'd love to see more of this. Exclusively ex-bourbon maturation and delicious. This is a 9 out of 10 whisky, even at that price. I'm not kidding, that's how much I love this. It says a lot about my preferences as whisky, about my preferred cask maturation, my preferred presentation, of course. But this is already replaced. And I don't think I'm ever going to have this missing in my collection while it's at that price and that quality. Well done, Glencadam. 9 out of 10. Leave it in this too. Another excellent whisky. This is Benromach's 10-year-old, but this isn't the standard 10-year-old. This is actually their discontinued 100-degree proof release at 57% ABV. They've since replaced it with a batch strength release that's the cask strength. I think they're just calling it Benromach cask strength. This is wonderful, wonderful stuff. This is kind of old school style whisky presented at cask strength at 57% ABV, more or less cask strength. And it's really, really quite engaging. There's lots to play with here, so you can pour a glass and leave it to breathe for a while and sip it neat. Then add a wee drop of water and bring it down layer by layer by layer and have a different dram in the glass each sip almost. It's wonderful stuff. The price, I think, is about £55 or less. I think that's the cask strength releases. I paid a wee bit less than that for this one, I'm sure. Still, I think I would replace this again, and I would have it back in the cabinet again. If I was going to only have one Benromach, maybe this would be the one I would pick. It wouldn't be this branding though. They've gone through a new branding with kind of red and white livery. It's still the same product, still the same whisky that goes in there. It's wonderful stuff, and you're pretty safe with anything from Benromach these days. Although I will say it's maybe not a beginner's whisky. There are some kind of old school, more challenging notes in there. Sometimes a wee bit like a sour note, like an orangey marmalade, slight bitterness in there. A light lick of peat smoke as well. Sometimes some old notes, like old leathery notes and things. This is still something to engage with, something to put in a lineup and give a bit of contrast and depth to the lineup. Great, fantastic, different take on Speyside whisky, and I would give this a solid 8.5 out of 10. I've reviewed this one before. This is a new one. Oops. Another broken cork. The reason I'm sharing this Timorous Beastie with you here is to demonstrate what I'm talking about when another way of scoring whisky is to talk about how fast you get through the bottle. You can give it, 4 stars out of 5 as much as you want, score out of 100, scores out of 10 like I'm doing today. But one of the biggest tells about how much you're enjoying whisky, because it says a lot about the value as well as how quickly you're getting through it. This Timorous Beastie I shared with you in the last recycled review, and I like it every bit as much. Point that you can see, not only have I replaced it, but I've torn through it again. And it gives me confidence to go and spend the money on things like this. This is another remarkable regional malts from Douglas Laing as well. This is another blended malt. It's another malt whisky. Now this has got product in it from Orkney, from Arran, from Islay and Jura in here. And it says that on the label, as well as giving us it at 46.8% and telling us that there's no colour and it's unchill filtered too. Great presentation. But the biggest thing about this is that it's easy to just sit back, enjoy, when you don't really want to sit there constantly analysing the whisky all night, and just enjoy it and know that for a 21-year-old whisky I paid £75 or thereabouts for this whisky. So there's nothing to talk about in the value either. It's great stuff, and it means that you're not precious about what you're drinking or what you're enjoying. It means that you can just go and enjoy it. This Rock Island 21-year-old, it used to be called Rock Oyster, but now it's called Rock Island. At 21 years old, this was very Islay forward. It was very peaty and a wee bit sooty on the finish as well. Quite salty, much more Islay forward than you would expect when you've got Arran and Orkney and Jura in there as well. Still, excellent stuff. Solid 8 to 8.5 out of 10 for this whisky, and I would gladly have any of the remarkable regional malts back in the cabinet again. Good value, interesting whiskies. I maybe should have spoke about this in the same vein as the Laphroaig 10. This is another Islay whisky, another core range official bottling from Islay. I've reviewed the 18-year-old from Bowmore before and the 12-year-old in a recycled review. This is the first time I've reviewed the 15-year-old. But for this, you could just pretty much copy and paste what I've said about the 12 and also what I've said about the 18. I've had amazing whiskies from Bowmore. In fact, the best sip of whisky I had in 2020 was a Bowmore. They are capable of producing amazing things. But to buy an official bottling from Bowmore that's amazing, it needs to be, one of the limited editions or really expensive releases, because their official bottlings are bizarrely just dull and bland and boring. This is maybe arguably one of the better from the core range. This is at 43% and 15 years old. But it's chill filtered. And it's probably pretty heavily coloured too. It's a shame, because Bowmore is a legendary distillery and they should be representing themselves better than this. Bowmore, please don't chase the budget volume stuff. Do what you're really good at, making amazing whisky. Present it well and we'll come and pay the money for it. Still, if you're new in your journey, if you want to explore Bowmore, if you are going to pick up an official bottling, maybe I would recommend you the 15-year-old is a good place to start. 43% ABV is better than 40, of course, and it is a softer take on Islay with that soft, quite rich, certainly aromatic peat. Look for lavender notes and sometimes some herbal notes and things as well. I would give this one 6.5 out of 10 and say Bowmore can do better. Independent bottlings is probably where you're going to go as an enthusiast. Talking of independent bottlings, I'm not going to rate this whisky because you can't buy it. This is a Tanninic. This is a Chawton whisky release, aged 11 years, and this is Tanninic, which is a Highland distillery just north of Inverness, kind of close to Alness, close to Dalmore actually. But I put this in there just so I could mention Tanninic. This particular expression has been taken and put into an ex-Islay cask. We gave it a very peaty, very sooty finish. Still wonderful stuff. I would say that in my experience, more than any other distillery, that Tanninic you can just buy at any age from any independent bottler, because there's virtually nothing available from an official bottling apart from the 10-year-old Flora and Fauna, which is also pretty excellent. Buy anything from Tanninic. It's amazing whisky. It's very texture forward. Most of it is matured in ex-bourbon casks, refill ex-bourbon casks. So it means that it's quite quiet and it's often quite spirit forward. But there are lots of kind of different maturations out there and finishes and things for you to get your hands on. People like to play with it. And it's okay to do that because Tuninic is a 10 million litre a year facility. It's one of Diageo's massive factories. We should celebrate the fact that there's so much of it available and the quality is so high. I used to have to do independent bottlings as a try before you buy, but you do connect with certain distilleries that you feel very safe, that unless it's a really ugly or clumsy cask maturation, it's going to be good, and Tuninic is one of those distilleries. I can't score this particular expression. I would probably score it an 8 to an 8.5 easily, but anything from Tuninic is going to be 8 and above in my experience. It's very easy whisky to connect with. What I've got here is 2 releases from Deanston. Again, on the theme of independent bottlings, I've got a 10-year-old here from Cadenheads, and I've also got an official release for supermarkets from Deanston. This is their Kentucky cask release at 40% ABV. This is an interesting thing. We've got something that's available in a plentiful amounts from lots of independent bottlers just now. It's a great distillery to explore either through official bottlings or through independents. Deanston is making fantastic stuff. Some of the more recent Deanston especially, it's got that lovely textured, even waxiness to it. It's quite interesting, and if you're after Clynelish but you realise that the Clynelish prices are going out of your range, Deanston is a good place to go. I've recently recommended their 18-year-old. It's getting better all the time. Tell me what you think about that. Neither of these are that. This is a completely niche thing. This is just from a single bourbon hogshead at 56.6% ABV, distilled in 2008 and bottled in 2019, and I enjoyed this 10-year-old very much indeed. It goes without saying that it's an independent, you can't really buy it anymore, but even this I would score an 8 to an 8.5 out of 10. And it was really good whisky. This is an odd thing, however. And I worry that this is a bit of a misstep for Deanston. They've spent years building that brand, and it's something that we're all really connecting with and loving because of their 46.3 presentation, because of their non-chill filter policies, because of their good, solid core spirit that they can mature in sherry casks or bourbon casks and any experimental cask you like, and we seem to lap it up. We seem to love Deanston. And then they come out with something that's a budget bottling, £29 at launch and £22 on offer. You could argue that this is a single malt whisky that at £22, yes, it's maybe good for mixing and buying as something to start a flight, and I would agree that that's very much the case. But it's up against some very, very good blends at that price. And I think that worse than that, what they're doing is diluting that brand. This is not the Deanston experience that you're getting here at 40%. You've lost all that texture, that spice, that maltiness and that grip. And even although they're talking about using a soft filtration method for this, which I imagine is like chill filtration without the chill, so it's an aggressive filter, but they're maybe not reducing the temperature down quite as much as they would normally. Still, they're taking stuff away from our Deanston that they shouldn't be taking away from it. I think this is a wee misstep, and I won't be replacing the Deanston Kentucky cask, despite the fact that I got on okay with this one. This is a 6.5 out of 10 whisky, which will probably be the lowest I score a Deanston ever. Okay, if you want a recommendation from me, that if you've got £22 or £20 to spend on a bottle of whisky, and it's not going to be that Deanston, maybe it should be this. This is a blended Scotch whisky. This is Catto's, not an age statement, it's a blended Scotch. So think of it in the same vein as maybe some of the Johnny Walkers that's out there, some of the Chivas Regals for example. But I would argue that this is better. This is from Inverhouse. Now it's a traditional brand, it's been out for years and years and years, but it doesn't appear on a lot of people's radar and many people haven't even heard of it. But this, for a blended Scotch whisky, is excellent. It's at 40% ABV, yes, it's light and easy, and it's very bright and top note heavy. It's very tropical, very accessible as well. I would say that the best blended whiskies I tasted last year were the 2 Compass Box releases, the Great King Street releases from the Artist Blend and the Glasgow Blend, but I would put this up there with those. This is excellent whisky for £20, £21 thereabout. I think if you're looking to put one blend in the cabinet, consider it being this one. It's a peach of a whisky. I would give this, for a blended whisky, it's probably worthy of 9 out of 10 for its price. But in the context of the other whiskies that I'm reviewing today, it's probably an 8 to 8, an 8.5. I hope that makes some sense to you. Still, I think I might put Catto's back in the cabinet again. Nearly finished, and I'm glad because my hands are very cold. Here's a wee Flora and Fauna. Now, if you want to know more about the Flora and Fauna range, you can If you want to know more about the Flora and Fauna range, you can have a wee look at my video that I did on this a couple of years ago. It's still very, very valid. This is their Inchgower. It's an interesting take on Speyside because as I'm tasting right now, it's a kind of lighter, slightly drier, more herbal, kind of almost like a pine needly resinous type thing going on here. This is a different take on Speyside. I think all of the Flora and Fauna I would replace because I just like to have them all available there. Most of them are Speysides, of course. Some of them are very, very similar. There are a few stand out that are a wee bit different, like the Blair Atholl, the Dillion, Benromach are a wee bit different, but the rest of them are quite similar, right up until you taste them next to each other. It's a wonderful experience, and it's wonderful to get your head around the subtle differences between them. However, specifically talking about this Inchgower, I would say that this is probably an 8 out of 10 whisky, and one of the weaker ones of Flora and Fauna. It's not one of the ones that's going to kind of hook people and bring them in, but it's still nice that there's an official bottling from Inchgower at 14 years old. All Flora and Fauna are probably chill filtered, and they're 43%, which is a wee bit of a shame. They could always be just a wee bit better, right? But this is still a good whisky, and you know what, just because I'm such a sucker for the range, I'm probably going to replace this at some point again, and in the meantime I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I don't drink enough bourbon, I think. Bourbon is something that I do reach to from time to time, but it's very much a mood thing. Like what I was talking about with the Timorous Beastie earlier on, you can measure how much I'm enjoying a bourbon by how much I get through it. This was a bottle that was opened before it was gifted to me by Phil and Deepa over at Whisky Mystery. They have a YouTube channel and they're based out of San Francisco area. When they were visiting Scotland, they were taking this around and they were sharing it with people. There was only a little bit out of the bottle when they passed it over to me, and I managed to get through the rest of this really quite quickly. When I was in the mood for a bourbon, this was one of my favourites and I was reaching for it regularly. This is batch 2018-04. Now that's going to mean a lot to the bourbon folk out there, but this is 64% ABV, powerful stuff. However, you can sip this neat. Wonderfully rich, wonderfully flavoured. All the kind of flavours that you would expect in a powerful bourbon are there. But there's also lots of flashes and flickers and subtleties and spice and grip and texture, and it just made it a very, very compelling and addictive sip. I loved this stuff. Oh wow, even that tiny drop. Now, I'm not going to be able to buy this again, of course not, but it's worthy to talk about and it's worthy to give a score. I would say, as a bourbon experience, this is a 9 out of 10 for me, easily, and I would love to have some more Booker's bourbon back in the cabinet again. Loved it. 9 out of 10. I'm going to miss that one. 3 bottles left and they're all from the same distillery. It's remarkable because despite my love for this distillery, I've only reviewed one official bottling from them in recycled reviews. This is, of course, I'm going to do this. This is Kilkerran. This is their 16-year-old. This is their heavily peated batch 2. And this is 2019's Re-Charred Oloroso, 57.1% 8-year-old. Let's start with the peated. Now this is Kilkerran, so you might wonder what's going on here with a heavily peated release. Well, I think it's important for them to have peated spirit available in order to be more flexible and more self-reliant going forward. But despite it being heavily peated, they still managed to make something that's really quite different from Islay Expressions. This is a kind of more aromatic, kind of more farmy type style of peat. It's less iodine-y, it's still quite salty and briny, and it's still very smoky, but it's a different take on peat. Despite this being young whisky, this is almost like their heavily peated work in progress series, and it seems to be switching up and getting better each release. In my experience at least. I'm still getting my head around batch 3, but I enjoyed my time very much with batch 2, and by the mere fact that I'm talking about batch 3, of course you know I've gone out and replaced that. But honestly, if there's anything available from Kilkerran right now, I'm buying it because I'm curious. I just love what they're doing down there. I would give this maybe a 7.5 out of 10, honestly. I think that I would like to see a wee bit of maturity with this. I know that I'm going to get some disagreement there because there's a lot of people out there that really love it. I think it's great value, so it's worth another half a point at least for its value alone. You can pick this up for about £35, and that is for cask strength whisky. This batch 2 is 60.9%. I think there's nothing to talk about or argue with on the value. Still, while I'll always have this on the shelf, where I really enjoy Kilkerran is in some of the other releases. Let's get to those. 7.5 out of 10. 8 on value. This is 2020's 16-year-old release. The Kilkerran started running spirit in 2004, so what we've got here is a release of some of their very first ever spirit that they made. This was my most anticipated release of 2020. Did it let me down? No, not at all. I was a wee bit surprised. There was a difference to this. This is different from the slightly sweeter, slightly more rich, slightly kind of, I don't know, more fruity 12-year-old release. Whereas this one, while there was fruit there, this was a drier thing. Now there was a kind of fruity, syrupy thing at the end, but generally speaking this was much more subtle. A drier experience, but something that I loved dearly and I grew to love more and more as the bottle went down. There was complexity here. You would do very well to leave it in the glass for a while and come back and go forwards and come back and start to get your head round it. It might take you by surprise a wee bit just how different it is from the 12-year-old sibling, but this was fantastic stuff. Unfortunately, it's going to be very hard to get your hands on, but if I come across another bottle of Kilkerran 16 at retail, because this was less than £60, unbelievable value for 16-year-old whisky. I'm going to talk about that in another video, I'm sure. But I would absolutely have it back in the cabinet again. Love this stuff. This is a 9 out of 10 whisky, and Kilkerran, just keep bringing it. We love what you're doing. And as if to drive home the point, YouTube can sometimes be a wee bit of an echo chamber. We're all kind of watching each other and listening to each other's reviews and things. And I think that there was no bigger example of that than the 2019 release of Kilkerran's 8-year-old. The 57.1 Re-Charred Oloroso release. Some people were saying it was overhyped. Some people were saying that it was the best whisky they'd had. And there was everything in between as well. Let's not forget the whisky, because that's what it's about. This was an amazing, bold, powerful, young, 8-year-old age statement cask strength whisky from, like I say, Re-Charred Oloroso casks that captivated everybody's imagination. Because despite that super active cask, sip it in contrast with anything else from any sherry cask you like, and the Campbelltown spirit, the Kilkerran Glengyle spirit shone through. It was still there. That's an amazing thing. This was wonderful whisky, mostly because you could pick this up for £55 for cask strength sherry aged whisky. It was just incredible value. So of course it disappeared everywhere and secondary prices started to drive it more and more expensive. I think you'd be up at £150, £200, I don't know, on auction. I did replace this. I did manage to get another bottle, and I've still got some in there in the house. I'm very grateful to have it. It was amazing stuff. It was 9 out of 10. For those who say it was overhyped, you've got a point. For those who say it was your best whisky you ever tasted, you've also got a point. Kilkerran make amazing things. That's why they were my producer of the year in 2019. I think that as long as there are whisky producers out there that's doing what Kilkerran are doing and releasing it for the prices that they're releasing, we will celebrate them. I'm very grateful to have replacement for that bottle of the 8-year-old in the house. that's me for another recycled review. Thank you very, very much for staying with me. I need to get inside because it's absolutely freezing here. Like I say, don't just take my word for it. Remember all the other reviews that's in the description box below. There's going to be plenty for that Kilkerran 8-year-old. And remember that there's a link to that spreadsheet as well. If you're interested in joining me for a live stream to hang out and have some whiskey time on a Thursday evening, I go live at 10:15. It's great fun. You might enjoy yourself hanging out with some fellow barflies. I would love to welcome you there. In the meantime, thanks for spending time with me for another 15 recycled reviews. And I'll see you in the next one. Hopefully I'll get through these 15 a wee bit quicker. Slanchiva. There's some left in this, and I missed it.